The Battle of North Anna, Grant vs. Lee in a deadly chess match. By late May 1864, the American Civil War had entered its fourth punishing year, and it was showing no signs of stopping. The Union, now led by General Ulysses S. Grant, the relentless, cigar-chewing commander, was determined to bring an end to Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. But doing so was easier said than done. You see, Lee wasn't just any general, he was a master tactician, the man who had turned outsmarting Union commanders into an art form. He was a man who knew the terrain like the back of his hand, and with every new battle, he seemed to create a fresh chapter in the textbook of military strategy. But Grant, oh, he was different. Nicknamed the Butcher for his willingness to take heavy casualties, Grant made it clear from the start there would be no more retreats. Where previous Union generals had tiptoed around Lee as if afraid to scuff his boots, Grant was more like a bulldog on a bone, determined, relentless, and not one to back down, no matter how bloodied the fight became. The first real test of this came in the Battle of the Wilderness, May 5 to 7, 1864. Now, this wasn't your typical open-field battle with grand cavalry charges and sweeping maneuvers. No, the Wilderness was an unforgiving, tangled thicket of dense trees and underbrush, perfect for ambushes and all manner of nasty surprises. The smoke from cannons and muskets mingled with the dense forest, turning the battleground into a hellish landscape. Soldiers fought through burning trees, unable to see more than a few feet ahead of them, and the forest itself became part of the enemy. It was as if the land itself had joined the fight. But here's the kicker, after 2 days of fighting and 28,000 casualties, something remarkable happened. Grant did not retreat. He didn't even blink. Instead, he ordered his army to sidestep Lee's forces and march southeast, keeping the pressure on. That, dear reader, was a moment where the war changed. Next came Spotsylvania Courthouse, May 8 to 21, 1864. If Wilderness was brutal, Spotsylvania was a nightmare turned real. The two armies collided again, this time in a desperate race for defensive positions. Grant's forces clashed with Lee's men in what would become known as the Battle of the Mule Shoe, where Union soldiers repeatedly tried to break the Confederate lines, only to be mowed down in waves. At one point, in what became known as the Bloody Angle, Union forces launched wave after wave of assaults against a section of the Confederate line. For 20 hours, yes, 20 hours, men fought in hand-to-hand combat, exchanging musket fire at point-blank range. The mud was red with blood, bodies piled on top of each other, and at one point, bayonets were the weapon of choice. It was madness. After days of this grinding battle, Grant's army took heavy losses, but again, he didn't pull back. When someone asked him where he intended to make his stand, Grant famously said, "Where do you want the men to die?" His answer was simple: they would keep fighting. Amid all this chaos, General Robert E. Lee had a personal battle of his own to fight. Lee was suffering from what historians believe to be either severe dysentery or heart disease. He wasn't just exhausted from the constant stress of command, he was physically falling apart. His staff would later describe him as looking pale as death during these campaigns. Some days, he could barely ride his horse, Traveler. During the North Anna campaign, his condition worsened to the point where he couldn't leave his tent for hours at a time. At one point, Lee reportedly confided to a friend, "I am as sick as a horse, but my spirit must carry me through." Despite his deteriorating health, Lee refused to relinquish command. For him, surrendering his army, or his duty, was simply out of the question. He had tried to take breaks, cutting back on coffee, staying on a strict diet, and resting when he could. But, as it turned out, leading a nation's military during a civil war wasn't exactly conducive to rest and recovery. Now, we arrive at the North Anna River, the latest obstacle in Grant's relentless pursuit of Lee. It's a seemingly unremarkable stretch of water at first glance, but to a military strategist like Lee, it was a fortress. The North Anna snakes through central Virginia, meandering through wooded terrain, creating natural choke points perfect for defense. Its strategic value was due to its position on the path to Richmond, the Confederate capital. Any army trying to get to Richmond from the north would have to cross the river, making it the perfect spot for Lee to make a stand. The river itself wasn't particularly wide, but the surrounding high ground made it a defensive dream. But here's where things get really interesting. The North Anna River is shaped like a giant V, with the river as the base and the 2 points forming perfect flanking positions. Lee saw this and devised a brilliant plan. He would divide Grant's army and attack the flanks. Essentially, he planned to split Grant's forces in two and crush them one at a time. The history of the river's name? Well, that's a little murkier. Some say it was named after a local Native American tribe, while others believe it came from a European settler's daughter, Anna, who had a fondness for the riverbanks. Either way, this serene body of water was about to become the setting for a fierce chess match between two of the greatest military minds of the Civil War. As the sun rose on May 23, 1864, General Ulysses S. Grant was feeling determined, if not outright cocky. His objective was clear: cross the North Anna River, crush General Robert E. Lee's army, and end the war once and for all. He had steamrolled through Virginia thus far, and as he stood staring at his map, he believed the next few days would be another notch in his belt. But, as we know, nothing about Lee was easy. Grant's strategy was simple, in theory. First, he would send General Winfield Scott Hancock, his ace in the hole, to seize the Chesterfield Bridge with his 2 corps. Hancock, fresh off his celebrated role at Gettysburg, was the kind of leader Grant liked: bold and effective. As Grant once remarked to his staff, if Hancock were in a poker game, he wouldn't just call your bluff, he'd raise you double and dare you to fold. Meanwhile, General Gouverneur K. Warren and his V Corps would move down Telegraph Road to take the bridges near Jericho Mills, securing an additional crossing point. In Grant's mind, it was a pincer move that would corner Lee and deliver a knockout punch. What could go wrong? Winfield Scott Hancock was the dashing hero of Gettysburg. At 6 feet tall with commanding blue eyes, Hancock had the kind of presence that made soldiers snap to attention. His family had a long military lineage. His father had served in the War of 1812, and his namesake, General Winfield Scott, was a towering figure in American military history. Hancock's own resume was impressive: a career West Point officer, he was known as both a brilliant strategist and a man with an unflinching sense of honor. But honor aside, today was about action. His orders were clear: take Chesterfield Bridge and open the way for the rest of the army. So, with that, Hancock marched forward. It didn't help that Hancock briefly lost track of where they even were along the North Anna. In this confusion, a local Southern sympathizer was forced to step in and set things straight, pointing out to Hancock exactly where they were. General Winfield Scott Hancock, Corps had crossed the river with relative ease, but what lay ahead was something different entirely. As his men approached Lee's main position, they found themselves staring at a line of Confederate defenses so well dug in, it looked like Lee had decided to start an underground real estate business. "It's like trying to move a mountain with a spoon," Hancock grumbled to his staff. And yet, move it he must. The Confederate soldiers in front of him weren't just standing around, they were entrenched so deeply, they might as well have been part of the landscape. And there was Lee's brilliance on full display. His defenses were positioned with the kind of care that only a man who had made a career out of outwitting his opponents could create. For Hancock, it was going to be a grueling day. "Sir, should we send for reinforcements?" one of his aides asked, eyeing the nearly impossible task ahead. Hancock, ever the stoic, replied, "I think we'll need more than just reinforcements. Maybe dynamite, if anyone has some handy." Meanwhile, General Gouverneur K. Warren and his V Corps were wrestling with a very different problem. The bridge they were supposed to cross at Jericho Mills? It wasn't exactly where the map said it was. In fact, there was no fort, no mill, the map had lied. Warren, with his sharp mind, and equally sharp temper, reportedly muttered, "Someone needs to remind these cartographers that guessing isn't an art form." Warren's forces meandered through the difficult terrain, searching for their crossing point like tourists lost in a foreign city without a map app. And when they did finally reach the river, the bridge they found was not only lightly defended, it was barely a bridge at all. It was more like a glorified log thrown over a stream. As his men stared at the rickety structure, Warren sighed and barked, "Well, I hope you're all good swimmers." Warren's men were tasked with crossing the North Anna at Jericho Mills, where they were supposed to link up with Hancock's forces. In theory, it sounded great, until they ran headfirst into A.P. Hill's Confederates, who had no intention of letting them pass without a fight. To make matters worse, the terrain was unforgiving: swamps, woods, and a maze of underbrush that seemed designed to trip up every soldier who tried to march through it. "Sir, the men are having trouble advancing. The ground is impossible," one of Warren's aides shouted, drenched in sweat. Warren, who was already frantically sketching new orders, barely looked up. "Tell the men if they can't move forward, they can always swim. We've got plenty of rivers left to cross in this war." Meanwhile, Hill's men were perched on high ground, which gave them a bird's-eye view of Warren's troops struggling below. It was like watching ants try to fight uphill while being sprayed with a water hose. The Confederates opened fire, and soon Warren's men were pinned down, unable to advance. A skirmish broke out, and it was far bloodier than anyone expected. While Grant and Hancock were busy dealing with Lee's entrenchments and Warren was fighting his way through the muddy hell of Jericho Mills, General Ambrose Burnside was preparing to add his own flavor to the day's chaos. Known for his luxurious sideburns and mixed results in battle, Burnside decided to send Major General Thomas Crittenden's division across the river at Curl's Mill, about a mile above Oxford. This would have been a bold maneuver if it weren't for one little problem. Enter Major James H. Ladley, an officer whose reputation had long been tainted by his inability to resist the bottle. With a family history that included distinguished military service, his great-uncle had served in the War of 1812, Ladley was expected to continue the family legacy. Unfortunately, his legacy included a drinking problem that was as notorious as his occasional flashes of battlefield brilliance. On this fateful day, Ladley had been imbibing a bit too much liquid courage. Instead of waiting for proper orders, he launched a reckless attack on Hill's forces. Perhaps it was the whiskey talking, or maybe he thought he was about to win a Medal of Honor, but either way, his attack was a disaster. His men, confused and unprepared, charged straight into a slaughter. It was like trying to charge through a brick wall with nothing but sheer bravado and a hangover. General Warren, watching from a distance, could only shake his head. "There goes Ladley again," he muttered to one of his officers. "At this rate, I'll need to order more coffins than ammunition." Now, while Grant was executing his plans, Lee was carefully laying his own trap. Lee had no illusions about his situation. His health was failing him, some suspected heart trouble or stomach pain, and his command staff was in even worse shape. Let's pause for a moment to consider the absence of some key players who might have turned the tide of battle. First, General James Longstreet, Lee's trusted right hand, had been out of action since the Battle of the Wilderness on May 6, where he was severely wounded by friendly fire. Though recovering, Longstreet was not yet fit for duty, and his absence left a gaping hole in Lee's command structure. Without Longstreet's steady hand, Lee had to rely on less experienced or injured officers. J.E.B. Stuart, Lee's famed cavalry commander, had been mortally wounded just a few weeks earlier on May 12, in a clash with General Philip Sheridan's cavalry at the Battle of Yellow Tavern. Stuart's death left Lee without his cavalry's eyes and ears, meaning he had to rely on his less-than-ideal reconnaissance reports. Even A.P. Hill, once a ferocious division commander, was suffering from illness that day. Hill had been in and out of the fight, and while he was present at North Anna, his health made him far less effective. As for Lieutenant General Richard Ewell, he had been struggling since Gettysburg and was cautious to a fault. Lee's staff was like a car running on spare tires. Into this mix stepped Major General Richard H. Anderson, who had taken over for Longstreet. Anderson, while competent, was no Longstreet. A South Carolinian with a military career stretching back to the Mexican-American War, Anderson was a good soldier, but he lacked the audacity and vision of his predecessor. He would follow orders but was not one to seize the moment on his own. Had these three men been in fighting form, the story of North Anna might have been very different. Despite all this, Lee devised a brilliant plan. Knowing Grant would try to cross the North Anna at multiple points, he decided to use the river to his advantage. He would allow Grant to divide his army by crossing in two places and then strike at whichever wing was weaker. The North Anna River, in Lee's mind, was the perfect natural barrier to split Grant's forces, much like the jaws of a trap closing around its prey. By the time Warren's V Corps finally crossed the river, they were met with stiff resistance from Hill's forces. Warren, ever the perfectionist, was already fuming over the botched map and disorganized crossing. His men scrambled across the river under fire, with artillery shells bursting overhead. It was chaos, and to make matters worse, Hill's troops had dug into high ground, making every step a brutal slog. As night fell on May 23, Warren's forces were bloodied but had gained a foothold across the river. Hill had held his ground, but Warren's determination and sheer numbers had won the day. Still, the real battle was yet to come. By the end of May 23, 1864, Grant had a sense that something was amiss. His forces were across the North Anna but had faced tougher resistance than expected. And with nightfall came reports of Confederate troops entrenching along the river. Grant, always pragmatic, wasn't too concerned. After all, he was on the offensive, and he believed he could outmaneuver Lee. But what Grant didn't know was that Lee had nearly snared him in a trap that, if executed, might have turned the tide of the war. As the stars flickered overhead and the men on both sides dug in for the night, the battle of wits between these two giants of war was just beginning. It was a foggy morning in Virginia as General Ulysses S. Grant prepared for the next phase of his North Anna River campaign. The plan was straightforward: move all his forces across the river and push forward. Yesterday's success, with Hancock taking the Chesterfield Bridge, gave him hope that today would finally see the unraveling of Lee's defenses. But Grant, ever the cautious optimist, had no idea that he was walking into a deadly trap, one woven with intricate precision by none other than General Robert E. Lee. On the other side of the battlefield, General Robert E. Lee was preparing to spring his trap. With Grant's forces split between the left and right banks of the North Anna River, Lee saw the perfect opportunity to strike. This should have been Lee's moment. With Grant's forces split, he had a golden opportunity to crush one wing of the Union Army before the other could respond. But then, disaster struck, not on the battlefield, but within Lee himself. His illness flared up so severely that he was confined to his tent, unable to personally direct the battle. It was as if the Confederate Army had lost its brain. In Lee's absence, General Richard Ewell, known for being more cautious than bold, hesitated. This wasn't Gettysburg's infamous day won all over again, but it was close. Ewell didn't press the advantage. One could almost hear Lee muttering in his tent, "Oh, if only I were on that field myself." Lee likely whispered through gritted teeth. But it was no use. His trusted generals were either cautious, incapacitated, or in some cases, just downright unlucky. Lee had to rely on General Richard Anderson, a solid but uninspiring officer who took over for Longstreet. Anderson did his best, but he lacked the brilliance of the generals who had come before him. Hancock and Warren were spared a full-on Confederate assault, and Grant, unaware of how close he came to disaster, continued his plans, thinking things were going just fine. By May 25, it was clear that the situation had devolved into a stalemate. Grant, ever the pragmatic commander, recognized that he had blundered by crossing the river and splitting his forces. Now his army was trapped, divided, vulnerable, and in striking range of Lee's powerful Confederate forces. But Grant didn't panic. Instead, he dug in, fortifying his position and playing a game of nerves with Lee. His strategy was simple: if Lee made a mistake, the Union would pounce. And Grant, despite the overwhelming odds, kept his sense of humor. When asked about the precarious situation, he reportedly remarked, "If Lee makes a mistake, we'll end this quickly. If I make one, we'll need a new army." Grant realized the battle wasn't winnable on these terms. Lee's defensive positions were simply too strong, and the divided Union forces meant he couldn't risk a major attack. The Confederate forces, though triumphant in holding their ground, were also exhausted and wary of a prolonged engagement. On the night of May 26, Grant made his move. He ordered his army to disengage. In a move that stunned Lee, the Union forces pulled back across the North Anna River and prepared for the next phase of the campaign. By May 25, it was clear that the situation had devolved into a stalemate. Grant, ever the pragmatic commander, recognized that he had blundered by crossing the river and splitting his forces. Now his army was trapped, divided, vulnerable, and in striking range of Lee's powerful Confederate forces. But Grant didn't panic. Instead, he dug in, fortifying his position and playing a game of nerves with Lee. His strategy was simple: if Lee made a mistake, the Union would pounce. And Grant, despite the overwhelming odds, kept his sense of humor. When asked about the precarious situation, he reportedly remarked, "If Lee makes a mistake, we'll end this quickly. If I make one, we'll need a new army." Grant realized the battle wasn't winnable on these terms. Lee's defensive positions were simply too strong, and the divided Union forces meant he couldn't risk a major attack. The Confederate forces, though triumphant in holding their ground, were also exhausted and wary of a prolonged engagement. On the night of May 26, Grant made his move. He ordered his army to disengage. In a move that stunned Lee, the Union forces pulled back across the North Anna River and prepared for the next phase of the campaign. It wasn't a crushing defeat, nor a decisive victory for either side. It was a tactical stalemate in every sense of the word. But what was clear after North Anna was that Grant wouldn't be dissuaded. He wouldn't give Lee the chance to rest or rebuild. The war would go on, and the Overland Campaign would continue. In the end, the Battle of North Anna was a game of chess where neither player could claim checkmate. Lee's brilliance had nearly handed him victory, but his failing health and cautious subordinates let the opportunity slip away. For Grant, it was another lesson in the difficulty of fighting an entrenched, brilliant opponent like Lee. But as he had said from the start, he would continue to press forward, no matter the cost. The men who fought in this battle left with scars, physical and emotional. Many of them would never forget the river, the swamps, the feeling of being trapped. And yet, as history shows us, the war was far from over. The Battle of North Anna was just one part of the Overland Campaign, but it demonstrated the enduring grit and determination of both Lee and Grant. While Lee's health faltered and Grant's tactics were put to the test, both armies would march on toward the inevitable confrontation ahead. Dear friends, as we reflect on the lessons of the Battle of North Anna, I warmly invite you to share your views and opinions in the comment section. Your reflections are more than just reactions to this video, they become part of a living record that future generations can learn from. Every thought, whether about leadership, courage, strategy, or the human cost of war, adds depth to our understanding of history. Please take a moment to leave your perspective so that together we can preserve these stories for education, remembrance, and the generations yet to come. Could Grant have turned disaster into victory if he had risked a full assault despite his divided army, or was withdrawal the only option? Did Lee's failing health cost the Confederacy a decisive victory, or would cautious subordinates like Ewell and Anderson have squandered the chance anyway? Was Grant's withdrawal a sign of weakness, or was it a brilliant move to preserve his army and continue the Overland Campaign? Could the Confederacy have crushed one Union wing if Lee had been healthy enough to command in person, changing the course of the war? Was North Anna a stalemate or a turning point? Did it simply delay the inevitable, or did it prove Grant's relentless strategy would eventually wear Lee down?